LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the February 23rd edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like what I'm doing here tonight. This week I picked out the 12 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which it'd be a really informative, educational, media criticism, and political commentary show for you all tonight. I put a link down in the video description to my clip list of my 12 clips. If you can understand my somewhat cryptic notes, but probably you can figure out the source of the clip and who's talking in the clip and kind of the subject of the clip if you look at the list. Also down in the video description is the source of all my clips, although I forgot to put the AM Joy in there. I got my unintentional political comedy from AM Joy that I'll get to in a moment. But my topic is Trump Feels The Bern. If you noticed the title of the video, Bernie Sanders is consolidating his position as the front runner after winning the popular vote in Iowa, winning New Hampshire, and winning Nevada. Still just a small portion of the delegates, but I don't think anyone has ever won the popular vote in all three of the first three contests. That used to be a big deal, but you'll see the corporate media covering Bernie Sanders, and they all at least give him credit for being a big winner and consolidating his position as the front runner, but there is some hedging from the corporate media and the establishment Democrats that I'll discuss with you when we get to that part. There was also a big debate where, Bloomberg was supposedly going to be the big threat to Bernie Sanders, but he got kind of deflated in the debate by Elizabeth Warren, who I've been leaning towards for a lot of the campaign, maybe thinking about voting for Bernie Sanders again in California like I did in the primaries in 2016. I'll talk about all of that more when I get to those topics. And then the final part of the Trump Feels the Bern topic is this weird news about Russia, that they are intervening in the 2020 campaign and possibly with a preference for Trump, although the word preference is highly controversial, which I will cover later. And then maybe trying to help Bernie Sanders in the primaries, and that comes up in several of the clips I'm going to show you. First, and there'll be Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor, politicizing his position, and then Marc Short, who's a more political person as the Chief of Staff for the Vice President, not the supposedly non-partisan National Security Advisor, but they all politicize this whole Russia interference topic. And you'll see clips of both of them in my unintentional political comedy clip I want to start with tonight. That's from AM Joy this morning. Joy Reid. I like watching AM Joy, and I like Joy Reid, but she definitely had a little snafu this morning. And it's one of those situations where people might have thought that it was an unscripted moment where she was like giving her opinion and showing her strength as a pundit, but it was apparently pre-written by her producers, which is often the case in these situations. I don't really pre-script any of this live stream except those first few sentences that I say over and over again, and I do kind of have them scripted there, but I've said them so many times that I kind of have it memorized anyway, so I don't even need it scripted. But almost all of this is unscripted, and it shows. There's some hemming and hawing. Sometimes I have these uncomfortable pauses where I kind of try to remember. I have like 10 really cool things I want to say, and if I end up saying 5 of them during the live stream, I'm lucky. But Joy Reid on MSNBC, she has all these producers, all these people working behind the scenes, writing stuff up for her. And in her unintentional comedy clip this morning, she definitely misread what her producers were writing about this whole. You'll see clips of Robert O'Brien and Marc Short here, and I'll have more longer versions of those clips later. But see if you can figure out what word. Well, it's pretty obvious, and the thing that's a little disturbing about it in terms of Joy Reid is you'll see she initially tries to blame the producers, and then she kind of admits it's her own incompetence, and by the end she's claiming that all sorts of stuff were happening off camera, which, I do a live stream here every week. I know that doing stuff live, stuff can happen off camera that messes you up. But anyway, I think I've introduced this enough, and I will talk about it a little more after we watch it together over here.
It's disconcerting that the briefing that you mentioned was a classified briefing in the House. That's one of the president's concerns, is that Adam Schiff's committee continues to leak selectively information.
I know, but you can't say it didn't happen and then say they leaked it.
I am saying it didn't happen, because I am saying what happened as far as the briefing, the same briefing the president get on election security. We're able to outline what we've done, measures we've worked with 1,100 municipalities to secure our election results, and the intelligence community not giving us information that they're trying to help re-elect Donald Trump.
I just want to...
If it's Sunday, it's Denny, Denny, Denny. In this instant, Vice President Mike Pence's chief of staff, Marc Short, refuses to... Oh, Denny, Denny, Denny. What does that mean? Oh, my producers wrote that in there. It's denied, denied, denied. Denny, I'm like, who's Denny? Basically, you have the vice president's chief of staff just sort of making stuff up. The New York Times reports that intelligence officials briefed lawmakers last week that Russia is once again, this is when you get a surprise script, attempting to interfere in our election to help Donald Trump win. Back with me are Jonathan Capehart, Maria Teresa, and Tiffany. People who can actually read are back with me. So basically what's going on... I'm sorry.
That's a low bar.
I'm laughing at my own incompetence.
It's a low bar, low bar.
Joy, you're the hardest
listen
working
to Robert
woman,
O'Brien,
so
okay?
totally understandable.
Y'all have no idea what happened in the break. That there was a whole thing that happened in the break that I had to run out and come. Y'all, I ain't gonna go into it. Robert O'Brien, let's listen to him. This is him trying to essentially say, and what you were hearing in the...
Okay, and I will have a Robert O'Brien clip, and you saw some clips there, but anyway, I think you got the unintentional comedy, the Denny, Denny, Denny clip, and whatever. I don't want to be too harsh on Joy Reid for making that mistake, but it is a reminder that a lot of the very smooth delivery that you see from people on the big corporate outlets is that happens because they have people who write their scripts for them. And you remember the famous Bill O'Reilly, the "fuck it, we're gonna do it live" thing, where he couldn't understand, what play me off meant, and that was a classic Bill O'Reilly outtake, and that was because he's used to having the stuff pre-written by his producers, just like most of the corporate anchors are. They do have parts where they're doing their own work, but not only do they have stuff pre-written, but they also have those earpieces where there's somebody talking in their ear who, you ever see the movie Broadcast News, and the William Hurt character who wasn't all that bright, but had a good producer behind him. Anyway, I'm going off into a big media criticism digression, but I wanted to point that out. And now I'm going to get to some news summaries, and pretty much all the news summaries were about Nevada, and then later they had little news summaries of what you saw Joy Reid talking about in that unintentional political comedy clip. She did talk about this story that first the House Intelligence Committee was briefed by this woman Shelby Pearson, and was under questioning said that the Russians were interfering in the 2020 election and had a preference for Trump. The word preference is an important word here, because that's where all the pushback came from, the word preference. Apparently the president had been previously briefed, and that's not actually what was said, and that will all come up later in some of the subsequent news clips. I'll have a news summary from CBS News' Face the Nation briefly on that, and then some little intros in the questioning of Marc Short and Robert O'Brien. But before I get to all that, I want to show how the corporate news media covered the results in Nevada, where Bernie Sanders, like I said, had his third big win. Iowa was kind of close. New Hampshire was not close, and Nevada was even less close. So, like I said, this is just a small percentage of the delegates, but it's a big thing for Bernie to win these three. And that was covered by all of the corporate news media this morning, starting with NBC News' Meet the Press, where I cut out sort of this middle part where Chuck Todd talked to a reporter, an NBC News reporter in Nevada, and I cut that out just because that's not the normal way that NBC News Meet the Press usually has an introduction from Chuck Todd, and then they go to the package, and they had this reporter in the middle, which I didn't want to cover, but I want to show Chuck Todd's introduction, and then I've edited with the package that normally where it would go together. So I think I put this back together the way Meet the Press normally airs it, and I don't know why they didn't do it that way this week. But you'll see here that Chuck Todd definitely gives Bernie Sanders credit for being the front runner and for his smashing victory and the 50% number. And there's a clip of Bernie Sanders' victory speech in San Antonio after he won in Nevada. He was already in Texas trying to drum up the Latinx vote in Texas for Super Tuesday. And I think the first part of this does give Bernie Sanders a lot of credit. The second part, I think, is good because it covers the debate, and I want to talk a little more about Elizabeth Warren. You'll see a brief clip of her in this longer news summary. But I think, like a lot of the news summaries, the corporate media kind of strikes back after giving Bernie Sanders credit for his wins by talking about all the fears of the establishment and the problems with Bernie being able to win and his electability, which I will discuss with you after we watch this NBC News summary from this morning over here.
Sunday morning, if there was any question about who the Democratic frontrunner is, Bernie Sanders has put that to rest. Sanders won a smashing victory yesterday in the Nevada caucuses, lapping the competition. With more votes still to be counted, here's where the Nevada caucus stands right now, with Sanders more than doubling the competition. This powerful showing in a diverse state will give Sanders huge momentum as the race moves to South Carolina on Saturday and then to the Super Tuesday states in just 9 days. Sanders was already thinking ahead last night in the Super Tuesday state of Texas.
In Nevada, we have just put together a multi-generational, multi-racial coalition, which is going to not only win in Nevada, it's going to sweep this country.
Sanders indeed won a smashing across-the-board victory, according to our entrance poll. He won among men and women, college graduates and non-college graduates, liberals and moderate/conservatives, union and non-union members, people who decided early and people who decided late. In short, Sanders crushed it. And in doing so, he may have crushed the hopes of a Democratic establishment desperate to stop him. The enthusiasm among Sanders supporters is matched by trepidation among other Democrats who fear that Sanders will not only lose to President Trump, but will take down the House majority and any chance of winning back the Senate as well. While the two sides in the party disagree over the merits of a Sanders nomination, they do agree on this. After a narrow loss in Iowa and wins in New Hampshire and Nevada, Bernie Sanders is now the odds-on favorite to be the Democratic nominee. Joining me now is John Ralston. He's editor of the Nevada Independent. As I said before, it's getting very late, very early for Democrats who want to stop Bernie Sanders from running away with the nomination, with a national primary day just 9 days away.
We are going to win across the country.
Sanders now leads in national polls by double digits and is ahead in Super Tuesday states like California, which will award 415 pledged delegates on March 3rd. And he only narrowly trails Biden in a new South Carolina poll.
I think we got a shot to win in South Carolina, which I would not have told you a month ago.
With the rise of Sanders, his opponents are beginning to take him on.
Senator Sanders believes in an inflexible, ideological revolution that leaves out most Democrats, not to mention most Americans.
Some believe that the way to beat Donald Trump is to be just as polarizing.
I ain't a socialist. I ain't a plutocrat. I'm a Democrat.
Bernie says we're going to keep the filibuster. I say Mitch McConnell is not going to get a veto over what we want to do.
We may very well be on the way to nominating somebody who cannot win in November.
Buttigieg is on the air in South Carolina attacking Sanders by name.
Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All would completely eliminate private insurance, forcing 150 million Americans off their current plans.
Sanders is already being eagerly named by congressional Republicans in campaign ads, like this one from Arizona Senator Martha McSally.
Kelly says he would support Bernie Sanders. $60 trillion in new spending, taxpayer-funded health care for illegal immigrants.
I love the idea of a Sanders candidacy. It gets me excited about the down ballot. I feel like we'd have a pretty good shot at the House. Pad our majority in the Senate.
Still, in Wednesday's debate, Sanders' opponents left him largely unscathed, attacking Michael Bloomberg instead.
Mr. Mayor, are you willing to release all of those women from those non-disclosure agreements?
He has stop and frisk, throwing close to 5 million young black men up against the wall.
It's not just about how much money you've got. It's what you stand for.
Now, with the prospect that Sanders could build an insurmountable delegate lead on Super Tuesday if Democrats don't align behind one alternative, all of the opponents to Sanders say no candidate should get the nomination without a majority of delegates.
You can't have somebody with 32% of the vote think they're going to be the nominee. What about the other 68%? If you're going to be the nominee, play by the rules, get a majority.
And joining me now is the Democratic Congressman from South Carolina, Jim Clyburn.
And Jim Clyburn, the Democratic member of Congress from South Carolina, was on multiple shows. I didn't actually take a clip of him. He wouldn't say who he's going to endorse, but then I was watching KCDC on MSNBC later, and there was breaking news that there's a leak that Wednesday morning after the South Carolina debate, Jim Clyburn is actually going to endorse Joe Biden. So I don't know, maybe Joe Biden will have some comeback. I pretty much pre-criticized that NBC News Meet the Press news summary of, how they were giving all this credit to Bernie in the first part and then kind of taking it back in the second part that I edited together, the pre-recorded package. But they did have some good coverage of the debate since I guess it was on MSNBC and NBC. And I actually thought Elizabeth Warren did a great job at the MSNBC debate on Wednesday night out of Las Vegas. I put that in my topic description, how she really took down Michael Bloomberg. I remember when I did multiple job interviews to become a public defender. That's a lawyer who defends people who are accused of crimes and can't afford a lawyer. I worked as a volunteer, and that was a job I really wanted, and it took me a few interviews to get that job, and eventually what I kind of realized in order to get that job was in the job interview I had to do a performance showing how I could do the job of a public defender. And in a way, I think that's kind of what Elizabeth Warren did in that last debate, that she used Michael Bloomberg as the proxy to show that she was the person who could really tear down Donald Trump in a debate and in a general election campaign. And I think that was her plan going in, and she really succeeded at that in that plan. And those debates are kind of like a job interview, and that's why I think Elizabeth Warren did really well. And there's one other thing about the Democratic presidential primary campaign I wanted to mention is that next Sunday after the South Carolina primary, that's probably the last Sunday that I'm going to be talking to you about all 6 candidates. The Sunday after that will be the Sunday after Super Tuesday. I think by Super Tuesday there'll be about, is it 38% of the delegates will be allocated? And some of these people, maybe Amy Klobuchar, maybe Joe Biden, maybe Pete Buttigieg, who knows? But some of those people who are more moderate but aren't billionaires are going to drop out. Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg can, go on forever. And maybe it'll be Bernie Sanders. I hope he looks like the front runner right now. Elizabeth Warren might be able to. It depends also what happens Tuesday. There's another debate this Tuesday before the South Carolina primary, and I don't know. Maybe Michael Bloomberg will have a comeback since his expectations will be so low. But anyway, that's pretty much my commentary on the Democratic primary campaign that I wanted to kind of fit in here, and I want to show you a couple more news summaries about that. Well, 3 more. The first one is ABC News's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, which is kind of a shorter version of what you just saw from NBC News, where they start off giving credit and kudos to Bernie Sanders for his big win, but by the end you'll see these questions that they want to ask before the South Carolina primary, and they're mostly about, like, how can we stop Bernie, and is Bernie stoppable, which, I don't know, seems a little biased. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little, but I'll talk about what it actually says after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. As we come on the air this morning, Bernie Sanders is riding high, the clear frontrunner for the Democratic nomination. They're still counting the votes in Nevada, but no question he's the winner there, crushing the competition, making good on his promise in that state to build out a bigger coalition of Democratic voters. With half the precincts reporting from the caucuses, Sanders has 47% of the county convention delegates. That translates into 12 of the 36 national delegates up for grabs in that state so far. Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg battling for second. And right now, Biden does have the edge at 19%, Mayor Pete at 15%. Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, and Tom Steyer further back, rounding out the field. South Carolina, the next key vote Saturday before the race goes national on Super Tuesday on March 3rd. So 5 big questions now. Is that state, South Carolina, make or break for Joe Biden and other moderates? Will Mike Bloomberg recover at this week's debate to boost his chances on Super Tuesday? Can any Democrat stop Sanders? Or does splintered opposition clear his path to the nomination? What will that mean for the Democrats' chances come November? So much to analyze and debate, so let's get right to our roundtable, joined by Republican Chris Christie, former mayor of New Jersey, ally of President Trump, Rahm Emanuel.
And like I said, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip. I don't think I over-exaggerated it that much in terms of the questions at the end. They were pretty much all like from the established. I mean, George Stephanopoulos is or formerly from the Clinton administration, the Bill Clinton administration, a establishment Democrat who's now a establishment media figure, I guess, because he also does the ABC morning show. And I don't know, like I said, I thought it was sort of a abbreviated version of what you saw in Meet the Press. CNN State of the Union, Jake Tapper, also started off giving kudos. He actually used the phrase "Feel the Bern." The State of the Union this week is actually watching voters feel the burn, or feeling the burn. And he talks about Bernie's impressive numbers in Nevada, not just numerically, but demographically. He put together a really good coalition to win this Nevada caucus, which, I mean, the Nevada caucus it's all still kind of small numbers, but it does mean something for the future and for momentum, and it's been an indicator in the past, although the past performance is not necessarily a certain indicator of future results, as they say in the financial community, I guess. And then you'll also see some clips of Biden and Buttigieg going after Bernie Sanders, so it's not devoid of the anti-Bernie sentiment, but not quite as, I think, biased towards the establishment view as the last 2 clips, in my opinion, which I will discuss with you possibly a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington. Welcome to the special Nevada caucus edition of our show, where the State of our Union is watching voters feeling the burn. Senator Bernie Sanders has taken one more step closer to the Democratic presidential nomination after an overwhelming victory in Nevada's caucuses last night. The votes are still coming in, but right now the Vermont senator's victory is not just impressive numerically, but demographically, and it's one he promised to replicate across the United States.
In Nevada, we have just put together a multi-generational, multi-racial coalition, which is going to not only win in Nevada, it's going to sweep this country.
Former Vice President Joe Biden appears to be in second place behind Sanders in Nevada, so he lives to fight another day, and he now looks to South Carolina voters to revive his campaign. But with early momentum and a half dozen candidates splitting the non-Sanders Democratic vote, Sanders could be on track to winning a prohibitive number of delegates in just the next 2 weeks, a possibility that former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg warned voters about in stark terms last night.
Before we rush to nominate Senator Sanders in our one shot to take on this president, let us take a sober look at what is at stake.
CNN reporters are covering the Democratic campaigns from coast to coast this morning.
And, you know, that CNN State of the Union news summary there, it did include those warnings from Buttigieg about the dangers of Bernie Sanders, but that is what Bernie Sanders' opponents are saying. And of all the news summaries, I think that was probably the most fair and balanced, if you think fair and balanced is a real term, not corrupted by Fox News. But speaking of being corrupted by Fox News, the next news summary I want to show you is the Fox News Sunday news summary. And they did, you know, talk about Bernie Sanders as the front runner and how he's a big winner, and just like the other news summaries. But on Fox News, that's something different because they think Bernie Sanders is the weakest candidate, and, you know, because of his democratic socialism. And you'll see that after Chris Wallace does his introduction, giving kudos to Bernie Sanders, he turns it over to Peter Doocy, the son of Steve Doocy, one of the big Trump supporters on Fox and Friends every morning. Peter Doocy is like one of the anchors on the curvy couch forever, back since the beginning of Fox News, I think, or for a long time. We have to check the book here, The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman, has the whole history of Fox News. I'd have to look it up in there. But Peter Doocy does his summary of the Nevada caucus, which I think there is some bias you can find in there, in that he starts off talking about Bernie Sanders' heart attack, which seems a little bit egregious in a news story about his victory in a important caucus. Also, you'll hear every time they talk about Bernie Sanders on Fox News, they have to say he's a democratic socialist at least once, and Peter Doocy does that. And then, like the Meet the Press and This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summaries, and a little bit CNN, they focus on the anti-Bernie sentiment of Democrats. And anyway, I pretty much criticized this Fox News Sunday news clip that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. We begin with breaking news, the results from the Democratic caucuses in Nevada. Senator Bernie Sanders scored a big victory, beating Joe Biden by more than 2-1, confirming he's now the party's frontrunner for the presidential nomination. Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, and Amy Klobuchar finished further back. But there was other election news this week. U.S. intelligence agencies reported Russia is once again trying to interfere in our presidential campaign, this time trying to help President Trump and Bernie Sanders. The president fired back its disinformation from the Democrats. In a moment, we'll speak with Marc Short, Chief of Staff to Vice President Pence. But first, let's bring in Peter Doocy with the latest on Sanders' victory in Nevada. Peter.
Chris, Senator Bernie Sanders winning big in the same state where he suffered a heart attack just 4 months ago. A comeback after uncertainty and a campaign so confident he'd already moved on to Texas to celebrate.
We have just put together a multi-generational, multi-racial coalition. It's going to sweep this country.
Also celebrating Joe Biden.
Now we're going on to South Carolina and win, and then we're going to take this back.
And he's trying to do that with a dig at Sanders, the Democratic socialist.
I ain't a socialist. I ain't a plutocrat. I'm a Democrat.
Pete Buttigieg has a more detailed warning.
Senator Sanders believes in an inflexible ideological revolution that leaves out most Democrats, not to mention most Americans.
It's getting late to stop Sanders, though. Michael Bloomberg's campaign manager warns the Nevada results reinforce the reality that this fragmented field is putting Bernie Sanders on pace to amass an insurmountable delegate lead. Bloomberg will be on ballots Super Tuesday, and he's a target even though he hasn't won anything yet.
It's a big threat, not a tall one, but a big one. Michael Bloomberg.
But before Super Tuesday, South Carolina looms, and that is where both Joe Biden and Tom Steyer, the billionaire, will try to chip away at Sanders' momentum. Chris?
Peter Doocy reporting live from Las Vegas.
So, like I said, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip before I showed it, but one thing that they did on the Fox News Sunday news summary is they kind of mentioned the Russia story, and I'll show you a clip a little bit later. If you're following along on my clip list, it's the last clip number 12, where Chris Wallace actually does talk about the different reactions to the intelligence or the news stories that U.S. intelligence is saying that Russia wants to interfere in the 2020 election in favor with possibly a preference, or the word preference is controversial, but maybe they can work with, Putin thinks he can work with Trump or has a preference for Trump, and then also has a preference for Bernie Sanders in the primary. That was sort of briefly referenced in the Fox News summary, and you'll see Chris Wallace in the final clip. I'm going to show you clip number 12, talk to Mark Short about that. But before I get to that, I have a couple more clips in... I have one more clip that's really about the Democratic race. It's the Joe Biden clip from CBS with Margaret Brennan. But before I show that clip, I want to show Margaret Brennan doing a brief news summary, not about the Democratic race, but about this weird news story about the Russian interference in the 2020 election, and whether they have a preference for Trump or they think they can work with Trump. And this intelligence officer who briefed the House Intelligence Committee, Shelby Pearson, and what she said, and whether there was evidence to back up what she said, and whether it was different from what Trump himself was briefed about by the intelligence professionals who brief him. And anyway, CBS News' Face the Nation didn't really do a news summary on the Democratic caucus in Nevada and Bernie Sanders' win, although they did have a lot of discussion about it with and their CBS tracking poll, and Anthony, is it Salvante, who is their pollster, but I didn't take any of those clips. But they had a interview with Robert O'Brien, and then and I'm not going to show you the CBS News Face the Nation clip on that, because I have a Robert O'Brien clip coming up in just a minute. Clip number 8. I'm about to show you clip number 6. Clip number 8 from ABC has Robert O'Brien saying essentially some of the same things, but at the end of the Robert O'Brien interview on CBS News' Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan came in and gave this little news report on this whole Russia interference story that it sets the context for the Joe Biden clip I'm going to show next. But anyway, this is the final news summary that I'll talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
The Trump-appointed official overseeing U.S. election security, Shelby Pearson, reported to Congress that Russia was interfering in the election and has shown a preference for President Trump. But sources tell our Major Garrett there was bipartisan pushback on her assertions and questions about the strength of the evidence. Congress has requested to see the underlying intelligence to back up that assessment, which, as you heard, the National Security Advisor said he had not seen. CBS stands by Major's reporting that the president was told Russia was trying to help him win. We'll be back in a moment.
Sorry, I almost got you into an advertisement there. But So yeah, you see the CBS reporting on there, and it's kind of nuanced in terms of Shelby Pearson reported one thing to the House Intelligence Committee, the preference for Trump that isn't backed up by intelligence, but that's actually what she said, and that's what got Trump all mad. And this is going to come up again. That was the CBS News version, and I'm about to show Margaret Brennan talking to Joe Biden about Bernie Sanders and maybe whether there are Russian bots who are pretending to be Bernie Sanders supporters, and that's why I put that clip next. But after that, I'm going to have 3 clips from 3 different news organizations that all of in each of those 3 clips, those news organizations are going to give an introduction kind of similar to what you just saw from Margaret Brennan. It'll be ABC, then CNN, then NBC, all kind of reporting on this weird, nuanced story. Like Shelby Pearson said something that may not have intelligence to back it up, that Russia has a preference for Trump. Maybe what really happened is that the intelligence shows that Putin thinks he can work with Trump. And then there's this whole idea that Russia is trying to support Bernie in the primary, but not necessarily in the general election. And I'll talk about all that a little more after we watch this final clip in the Democratic primary part of my topic, which is Joe Biden talking about, whether he can beat Bernie Sanders and whether Bernie Sanders is supported by Russian bots and there are Russian bots attacking him on Facebook, etc. Which, anyway, I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch this 3-minute Joe Biden clip together over here.
I need to do that. That's why I'm running.
Bernie Sanders, can you stop him in terms of the momentum he has? The Bloomberg campaign, as you know, is out saying that for moderates like yourselves, he's going to basically end up with an insurmountable delegate lead because of his early success.
I told you I'm not going to play this game with you. I don't know. It's not about who I stop. It's why I'm running. Why I'm telling the people that I should be the next president, why I'm the best guy to beat Trump. All those other polls you all cite also, so I'm the person most likely to beat Trump. I'm the person that, in fact, in those polls, in addition to that, I'm the only one, in terms of the Russians, all these stuff you've all been reporting, the Russians don't want me to be the nominee. They spent a lot of money on bots on Facebook, and they've been taken down saying Biden's a bad guy. They don't want Biden running. No one's helping me to try to get the nomination. They have good reason.
Who informed you of that? Was it Facebook, or have U.S. intelligence officials told you about some kind of meddling with the campaign?
I have not spoken to the intelligence community, but I think the intelligence community should inform the rest of us who are running what they told Senator Sanders.
And there's no date for that to happen?
Not that I'm aware of.
But you're asking for it?
I think they should.
You should. From what you're seeing, you talked about Facebook. And them alerting you. Am I understanding you correctly?
I was told that there were a lot of bots on Facebook, and they've been all taken down. And so there were attacks on me.
Fake accounts being run by the Russians.
Yes. And they were taken down. But I don't know who. I didn't get a call from Facebook, but I was told by my staff that's what happened.
Because I know you've been critical of Senator Sanders for not being strong enough in his condemnation of some of the vitriolic sentiment online. And Senator Sanders has come out with a statement saying, and he said it on the debate stage as well, that perhaps some of this may be fueled by the Russians. In other words, they're not actually his supporters. Do you buy that?
Well, look, the people who occupy my office, maybe they were Russians, I don't know, but they said they were Bernie supporters. The people who occupied other offices and the people who did these terrible things to the culinary workers and the women who run that operation, I guess anything's possible, but they're identified as Bernie supporters. So I'm not making any comment beyond that, but there should be absolute condemnation of the conduct of these folks who are engaging in that kind of behavior and the misogynistic behavior against the culinary workers and people coming into my office. The police this was back in the first 2 primaries, and have to call the police to get them out of office. I mean, that's Trump-like stuff. I mean, this is not the stuff that we've done in Democratic primaries before.
When he says the ugly stuff.
And I don't know, I think that Biden was kind of mixing a bunch of stuff together there, like nasty anonymous comments or to culinary workers union members that were misogynists, and making that kind of the same as activists who may have done a sit-in in his office to protest the immigration policies of the Obama-Biden administration. You know, a lot of progressives. I was one of those people who was out there back during the Obama administration protesting their, Obama being the deporter in chief, and the ACLU had a lawsuit against the Obama administration for kids in cages. That's where we got the pictures of the kids in cages that people later mistakenly used to attack Trump, who has a much worse policy in terms of kids in cages than the Obama-Biden administration ever even dreamed of. But it's a fact that the first kids in cages pictures do come from the Obama administration, and that's why there were sit-ins in Biden's office by activists who didn't like his participation there. And that's not the same as the online Bernie bros who attack people and may be aided by Russian bots, and who knows. But I just kind of marvel at the thought that Joe Biden was the putative front runner for all this time before anyone voted, because I guess he was leading the national polls. But the national polls can kind of change after there are all these contests like Iowa and New Hampshire and Nevada, where Biden just didn't do very well, and Bernie Sanders has won the popular vote in all three, and he may start waging a comeback with a win in South Carolina, but it might be too little too late. It's 3 days before Super Tuesday. Like I said, next Sunday I will be doing my live clip roundup between South Carolina and Super Tuesday, and I can't think of any reason any of the 6 candidates who were on the debate stage last Wednesday and will be debating this Tuesday, I can't think of any reason why any of those candidates would drop out between South Carolina and Super Tuesday. But 2 weeks from tonight, after Super Tuesday, there's actually a bunch of more contests the Tuesday after Super Tuesday that might also be important. But maybe Amy Klobuchar, maybe even Joe Biden, maybe Pete Buttigieg, whoever does really poorly in South Carolina and Super Tuesday, they could be gone 2 weeks from now. And 3 weeks from now, we might be down to a 2 or 3 person race. I mean, I guess as the pundits say, only time will tell. But I want to get to the last part of my kind of 3-part topic on Trump Feels The Bern. First, there's the Nevada primary and some of the background about the other candidates, and then the third part is this weird Russia news that I kind of have shown some clips on it. There was the original Joy Reid Denny clip that talked a little bit about the story that the House Intelligence Committee was briefed by Sherry Pearson that, well, under questioning, she said the Russians had a preference for Trump, although apparently the intelligence only shows that Putin thinks that he can work with Trump. And then there's this whole idea that Russia is helping Bernie Sanders in the primaries, not necessarily the Russian preference for the general election. Well, the next 3 clips I'm going to show you are ABC, CNN, and NBC. There's an introduction about each of these next clips where there's a little bit of news reporting, and then there's cross-examination of a Trump administration official. First on ABC, it's Robert O'Brien. This is the one Robert O'Brien clip, although he's also kind of said this other places, where this is the National Security Advisor. And I'm not saying Robert O'Brien is the first National Security Advisor to act in a partisan manner. I mean, I'm kind of old enough when I was very, very young, like preschool, elementary school. I can remember Henry Kissinger being the national security advisor, and he did some partisan stuff. And Susan Rice, who I'm going to talk about a little bit later, maybe she did some slightly partisan stuff. But Robert O'Brien here is echoing what Donald Trump says in a campaign rally, that when asked about the intelligence that Russia might be having a preference for Bernie Sanders, he says something that if Bernie Sanders is the Democratic nominee, I think we are going to hear the words honeymoon in Moscow so many times. Honeymoon in Moscow is going to be, we're going to be so sick of the phrase honeymoon in Moscow. And you're going to hear Robert O'Brien say that phrase in his answer here to George Stephanopoulos. I almost stopped the clip at that point because that is a highly partisan statement from someone who's supposed to be nonpartisan, supposed to be just dealing with national security and avoiding partisan politics so he has credibility. But anyway, that's this next clip, which clip number 8, that I will talk about with you a little more. And like I said, it has an introduction from George Stephanopoulos about this whole Russia controversy, and kudos to George Stephanopoulos for going back to the whole Trump-Putin Helsinki news conference that was one of the many, many low points of the Trump administration. In this one where Trump took the word of Vladimir Putin over his own intelligence agencies. And anyway, I'll talk about that clip a little more after we watch it together over here.
President Putin, did you want President Trump to win the election, and did you direct any of your officials to help him do that?
Да, я хотел, чтобы он выиграл. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Because he talked about bringing the U.S.-Russia relationship back to normal.
My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be.
There you see President Trump with Vladimir Putin back in 2018 discussing Russian interference in the 2016 election, as we've seen dramatic new revelations this week about how Russia is attacking our elections again. Reports that senior intelligence officials have told lawmakers that Russia is interfering in the 2020 election with the aim of re-electing President Trump, and that Russia is interfering in the Democratic primaries to help Bernie Sanders. Sanders responded yesterday in Nevada.
We were told that Russia, maybe other countries, are going to get involved in this campaign. And look, here is the message to Russia. Stay out of American elections.
Let's address all this now with the President's National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien. Ambassador O'Brien, thank you for joining us this morning. How is Russia interfering in the 2020 election?
Well, there are these reports that they want Bernie Sanders to get elected president. That's no surprise. He honeymooned in Moscow. The President Trump has rebuilt the American military to an extent we haven't seen since Ronald Reagan. So I don't think it's any surprise that Russia or China or Iran would want somebody other than President Trump. If President Trump's elected, we're going to continue a peace through strength foreign policy and defense policy, and that's not good for our adversaries. It's good for us and our allies.
Well, the reports are actually that they're trying to help Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primaries. And of course, you've seen the reports that the lawmakers have been briefed by an intelligence professional that it's Russia's aim to favor President Trump in the 2020 election. Have you seen analysis from the intelligence community showing that one of Russia's aims in its election interference is to help President Trump?
Yeah, I have not seen that, and I get pretty good access, as you know from your time in the White House. The National Security Advisor gets pretty good access to our intelligence. I haven't seen any intelligence that Russia is doing anything to attempt to get President Trump reelected. I think this is the same old story that we've heard before. I've seen the reports from that briefing at the Intel Committee. I wasn't there, but I've seen no intelligence that suggests that. I've also heard that from the briefers that that's not what they intended the story to be. So look, who knows what happened over at the House and the Intelligence Committee, but I haven't seen any evidence that Russia's doing anything to attempt to get President Trump reelected. And our message to the Russians is stay out of the U.S. elections. We've been very tough on Russia, and we've been great on election security. So I think it's a non-story.
Well, a non-story. Obviously, a lot of people don't think it's a non-story.
And anyway, like I said, Robert O'Brien was on a couple shows there, and he said that that was the one where I showed that clip because that was the one where he actually said the honeymoon in Moscow line that you'll see again from Donald Trump at his political rally in the final clip I showed, clip 12, the Fox News Sunday Chris Wallace cross-examination of Marc Short. Marc Short is the former legislative director for Donald Trump, who's now the chief of staff for Vice President Mike Pence. And I have a few clips from Marc Short coming up. But the one other thing that I wanted to say about that Robert O'Brien clip, I pretty much pre-criticized it. I talked about how he made that partisan honeymoon in Moscow comment that you'll hear again at the end. And I thought that George Stephanopoulos did a pretty good job of, in the introduction, giving the news summary about this briefing to the House Intelligence Committee claiming that Russia had a preference for Trump, and you saw Robert O'Brien claiming he hadn't seen that intelligence, but that's not the same thing as saying there's not intelligence backing it up. And I watched Robert O'Brien on a couple different shows. I read a couple articles, and I'm not sure exactly, because I'm reading between the lines. It seems to me what actually is going on is there is intelligence saying that the Russians believe they can work with Trump, but when Shelby Pearson, the intelligence professional who briefed the House Intelligence Committee, was cross-examined by Democrats, she kind of exaggerated that intelligence to say that Russia had a preference for Trump, which may be a little bit beyond what the intelligence actually says for 2020, and that created this whole uproar in the Trump administration. Meanwhile, there is also intelligence that Russia wants to help Bernie Sanders in the primaries, not necessarily the general election. And I think, mainly what Russia wants to do is sow distrust and discord in the American election so that, people don't really trust whatever the results are in the primary and the general election, which, I don't know, almost seems like Trump's playbook in terms of, it's rigged. It's a rigged system. It's all rigged. That's what he said before 2016. And supposedly there are these imaginary millions of illegal voters that made him lose the popular vote. And anyway, now I'm going off on a big tangent. So I want to get to my next clip, which is CNN State of the Union, Jake Tapper questioning Marc Short, the chief of staff for Vice President Mike Pence, and talking about, the next clip is actually not Mike Pence, not Marc Short, the chief of staff for Mike Pence. It's Jake Tapper questioning Chris Murphy, the Democratic senator from Connecticut, about what you just saw Robert O'Brien say in the last clip. Sorry, Marc Short's in the next couple clips. And what is really important about this clip is Jake Tapper does an introduction where he gives the explanation that I kind of just gave. Jake Tapper has been a great source on this, and Donald Trump even gave some praise to Jake Tapper of CNN, believe it or not, in one of his political rallies, although he also really insulted him and said, I hear that his wife actually likes him, was one of the, I've been following all of this on Twitter, but I saw Jake Tapper talking about his national security source that sort of broke down this whole story that there wasn't actually a preference for Trump by Russian interference in the 2020 election. It's more that they think, well, I'll show you, you can see Jake Tapper's introduction to his questioning of Chris Murphy here, and then I think Chris Murphy does a good job of debunking what you just heard from Robert O'Brien in the previous clip, and I will talk about all of that with you a little more after we watch the CNN State of the Union clip, Jake Tapper doing his news reporting, followed by Chris Murphy's rebuttal of Robert O'Brien that I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
Welcome back to the State of the Union. I'm Jake Tapper. We learned this week that the U.S. intelligence community has warned lawmakers that Russia is already trying to interfere in the 2020 presidential race. Senator Bernie Sanders confirmed a Washington Post report that he was briefed by officials that Russia is trying to aid his campaign in the primaries as part of Russia's overall disruption campaign. While President Trump and a top aide are now denying what an intelligence official told lawmakers in a briefing, that the Russians have a preference for President Trump. A national security official tells me that the briefer may have overstated and mischaracterized the intelligence regarding Trump, which as of now does not suggest the Russians have a preference, though they do believe they can work with President Trump. Joining me now, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. He's a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thanks so much for being here. I want to ask about something that National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien was asked about on a different show, about Russia interfering in the 2020 election, specifically the Bernie Sanders element of it. He said, quote, "There are these reports that they want Bernie Sanders to get elected president. That's no surprise. He honeymooned in Moscow," unquote. What's your response to that?
Well, our national security advisor should stay out of politics, and that is a political statement. What we know is that the Russians never stopped interfering in American politics. They don't just get involved in elections. They are involved every single day. And analysis of what they've been doing on Twitter since 2016 has been pretty clear. They are weighing in over and over again in support of right-wing causes, in support of Donald Trump's political agenda. And of course, it stands to reason that they want Donald Trump reelected because he has been a gift to Russia. He has essentially ceded the Middle East to Russian interests. He has accomplished more in the undermining of NATO than Russia has in the last 20 years. And he continues to effectively deny that they have an ongoing political operation here in the United States that by and large is intended to support Donald Trump and his allies.
So the Trump people would push back. They would say that he has actually gotten NATO members.
And Jake Tapper there was questioning Chris Murphy about what you'll hear from Marc Short in the next couple clips. Well, there's an intervening rebuttal clip about something Marc Short says in between the next two Marc Short clips. And like I said, it was a good rebuttal of what you heard from Robert O'Brien. Jake Tapper specifically asked Chris Murphy to rebut what Robert O'Brien said, and I kind of explained why it was a bogus analysis from Robert O'Brien and a partisan analysis from the National Security Advisor, who is supposed to be nonpartisan, hasn't always been nonpartisan. But the next clip I want to show is from Chuck Todd talking to the Chief of Staff for the Vice President, Marc Short, who's trying to defend this same news reporting. Now, Chuck Todd, I think his reporting isn't quite as good as what you saw from Jake Tapper, who I think did a good job differentiating between this Shelby Pearson reporting to the House Intelligence Committee about a Russia preference for Trump, and maybe it was really just they can work with Trump, and why it was leaked about the preference for Bernie Sanders. You know, Bernie Sanders claimed it might be establishment Democrats or the deep state, or I don't know, in the intelligence community who doesn't want a Democratic socialist elected as president. Maybe that's what that leak was all about. And there are some liberal, progressive, whatever you want to call them, people that I follow who are very skeptical of some of the anti-Russia stories, some of the stories that have been supported by the so-called deep state. If you, where is it? Where's the nowhere to hide? Somewhere. Oh, there it is. right over the Mr. Spock cup here, you can see the No Place to Hide Glenn Greenwald book. And if you follow like Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi on Twitter like I do, there's some good progressive skeptics on some of this Russia interference stories, and maybe it's leaks from deep state intelligence community people. And the thing is, the deep state is not liberal. That's why they would be anti-Bernie. That's why they're leaking things against Bernie. People in the CIA, are they liberals? I don't think so. John Brennan, James Clapper. I don't want to go. That would be like a huge tangent to go off on that I don't want to go off on. But I've been watching a lot. I find some of that stuff very informative. I don't always agree with how far Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald go in their Russia collusion skepticism. But anyway, this next clip I want to show you from Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press. You'll see he kind of buys into some of the leaks from the so-called deep state that I was just talking about. You'll see he talks about the presumption that Russia wants to help Trump, not the nuanced version you heard from Jake Tapper in the earlier clip. And then he does not cross-examine Marc Short on this thing I keep talking about, arguing with people on Twitter. I keep hearing this right-wing talking point that, and you'll see Marc Short make this point in this next clip, that, Trump is really, one of the things they always say is Trump is really tough against Russia, and that's not really true. And then the actual Russia interference in the 2016 election took place during the Obama administration, and they did not handle it right. This is the part I'm going to refute with my clip after next, that there was this stand down order from Susan Rice. Stand down order from Susan Rice. That's what Chuck Todd does not cross-examine, does not follow up on at all. That's why I play this next clip for, almost 3.5 minutes, just to show how Chuck Todd doesn't follow up on the stand down order from Susan Rice that I have done a better job of refuting than Chuck Todd did, which I will proceed to do after we watch that 3.5 minute clip together over here.
Welcome back. Last week we learned that U.S. intelligence officials have concluded that the Russians are once again trying to interfere in the presidential election, presumably to help President Trump. Mr. Trump falsely dismissed this as Democratic disinformation.
The do-nothing Democrats, they said today that Putin wants to be sure that Trump gets elected. Here we go again. I was told that was happening. I was told a week ago, they said, they're trying to start a rumor. It's disinformation.
And yet the president dismissed his intelligence chief involved in that briefing, Joseph Maguire. Bernie Sanders also confirmed that intel officials told his campaign a month ago that Russia is trying to help him too.
Here is the message to Russia: stay out of American elections.
Joining me now, representing the White House, is Vice President Pence's Chief of Staff, Marc Short. Mr. Short, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Chuck, thanks for having me back.
Just a basic question. Does the president believe that Russia's trying to interfere in the 2020 election?
I think that Russia and other nations have consistently tried to interfere in American elections. The question that I think is out in some of the fake news media was an assertion that Russia was intentionally trying to help Donald Trump. That's different than foreign nations consistently looking to undermine America's democracy. They will always try to do that.
All right, he called it a disinformation campaign. The president himself, he believes his intel officials are passing on disinformation to him?
No, Chuck. What he believes is that the people leading the House Intelligence Committee, particularly Chairman Schiff, intentionally distort information and leak information that is false.
This information didn't come from them, though. This information came from the intel officials.
No, Chuck. I, in fact, was in the very briefing that the president received from the Intelligence Committee. There has not been an assertion. There has not been an assertion that Russia is trying to benefit Donald Trump. That is different than saying that.
Forget Donald Trump. What I don't understand is why isn't the president concerned about Russian interference?
And concerned, Chuck. How about the media covering the fact that in 2018, when Donald Trump was president, we had midterm elections that went off without a hitch. In 2016, when there was interference, it was under the Obama administration's regime. In 2016, National Security Advisor Susan Rice told her team to stand down. That's what they testified. The head of cybersecurity at NSC said we were told to stand down when raising concerns about Russian interference. We continue to talk about what's happening here with Donald Trump when, in fact, we've enhanced security in elections. Elections today have been asserted that they are safer than they were.
The acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, said that the previous head of the last Senate-confirmed Department of Homeland Security Secretary that we had, Kirstjen Nielsen, was told she could not bring up efforts to deter election interference, particularly when it came to Russia, because it set the president off. I mean, are officials even allowed to bring this up to the president?
Of course. I don't know what Mick said in that context. I was there just this week when officials were bringing it up and talking about it. It's why the president has had the Department of Homeland Security and others basically work with 1,100 municipalities across the country to ensure that
Why did he get rid of Mr. McGuire?
Joe McGuire, Admiral McGuire, is an American patriot who has served with honor and distinction. And Donald Trump hopes that Joe McGuire will find another role in our administration. His term
Why did he dismiss him?
Because March 12th was his end date. We had to nominate somebody else.
You could have nominated him permanently for the job.
So we're going to have an interim director. We're going to have an interim director and Rick Grinnell, and the president is going to come forward with a more permanent director.
Supposedly he was going to appoint.
And, you know, Chuck Todd did a pretty good job there of following up, cross-examining Marc Short about why the acting director of national intelligence, Joe McGuire, was fired instead of, you know, he had till March 12th. That was not really an answer to whether he was fired, because I just looked at what day did it. I looked at my calendar, and it's not March 12th. So that wasn't really a responsive answer. But one thing that Chuck Todd didn't really follow up on that I mentioned, something burning behind me now. Thought I smelled something burning, but because I do have over my, over this shoulder, I do have a couple of my #LiberalViewer candles burning, but they haven't ever set anything on fire so far in my last 356 shows, or, well, there haven't been candles in all of them. But one thing I wanted to point out that Chuck Todd did not cross-examine Marc Short about was this weird Republican talking point that I've seen on social media over and over again, that Susan Rice gave a stand-down order to this guy, Daniel, what's his name? J. Michael, let me look at my, J. Michael Daniel, to his group, gave a stand-down order to them, to his group, to no longer retaliate or do anything about the Russian interference in the 2016 election. But it turns out that stand-down order, that's not really what happened, and I actually downloaded the video from C-SPAN, the June 20th, 2018 Senate Intelligence Committee hearing where J. Michael Daniel testifies, and you'll see what he says is that stand-down order, and I'm using air quotes because you saw Marc Short actually used air quotes when he said stand-down order, that what J. Michael Daniel says is that the stand-down order was just, they decided, the options for retaliation, they decided, he uses this weird phrase that I've never heard before, neck down. They decided to neck down the number of people involved in coming up with the options. So his particular group was told to stand down, but that doesn't, and he says, I can tell you more in the classified briefing, but there was still stuff going on. It just wasn't this particular, the stand down order was for a specific group of people. Not everyone was supposed to stand down. And this is the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing that I found on C-SPAN from June 20th, 2018. That is the penultimate clip tonight over here.
This is a question I have for you, Mr. Daniel, and this puzzles me. There's a quote I want to read you from an article that appeared of what happened in late August of 2016. At his morning staff meeting, Daniel matter-of-factly said to his team it had to stop working on options to counter the Russian attack. Quote, "We've been told to stand down." That's a quote from you. Daniel Preto, one of Daniel's top deputies, recalled, quote, "I was incredulous and in disbelief. It took me a moment to process. In my head, I was like, did I hear that correctly?" End quote. Then Preto asked, quote, "Why the hell are we standing down? Michael, can you help us understand?" Question mark, end quote. Is that an accurate description of what happened?
So that is an accurate rendering of the conversation at the staff meeting, but the larger context is something that we can discuss in the classified session. But I can say that there were many concerns about the widespread, how many people were involved in the development of the options, and so the decision at that point was to neck down the number of people that were involved in developing our ongoing response options. And it's not accurate to say that all activity ceased at that point.
He did say neck down, neck down. That's what the transcript said, and I thought that's got to be a bad transcription, but no, he did say neck down. I've never heard that phrase before, but anyway, I think that pretty much refutes this weird right-wing talking point about the stand-down order. The stand-down order from August 2016 was telling this particular group that they were basically it was about the retaliatory measures. They wanted to create a much smaller group of people who were involved in creating the options for retaliatory measures. That's basically what I've gleaned from my reading on this topic, and it's been totally misrepresented by Mark Short and many other people on the right wing, that Obama and his national security advisor, Susan Rice, told that everyone to stand down, don't do anything about Russia interference. No, that's, as you just saw in that last clip, that is not true. And anyway, I have one more news clip I want to show you. This is another Mark Short clip. This is a little bit of an antidote to clip number 5 I showed you earlier, the Fox News Sunday news summary, where you saw they were pretty biased in terms of how Peter Doocy covered the Bernie Sanders win in Nevada, and this, at least in this clip, you'll see Chris Wallace cross-examining Mark Short, comparing how Bernie Sanders reacted to this idea that Russia is trying to help him versus how Trump reacted. And this is where you can see Trump. I promised you earlier when I showed the Robert O'Brien clip, the honeymoon in Moscow clip. Well, you'll hear honeymoon in Moscow from Trump himself in this clip. And you'll also hear about Shelby Pearson. And Chris Wallace does a better job in this clip than Fox News did in the news summary. And I will talk about all of that a little more after we watch this final news clip together of the night over here.
Sure. Chief of Staff to the Vice President, Marc. Welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks for having me back, Chris.
U.S. intelligence says that the Russians are interfering again in our presidential election, this time trying to help President Trump and Bernie Sanders. Here's how those two men reacted this week.
When I say to Mr. Putin, if elected president, trust me, you are not going to be interfering in American elections.
I see these phonies, the do-nothing Democrats. They said today that Putin wants to be sure that Trump gets elected. Here we go again.
While Sanders targeted Putin, why did the president go after Democrats?
Chris, I think that there's not intelligence that said that the Russians are trying to help Donald Trump win election. We know that foreign governments have been trying to interfere in elections to try to sow chaos. They've been doing that for many years, and it's not just limited to Russia. But there's not intelligence that suggests that they're trying to help Trump. When this administration has sanctioned Russia more than any administration since Ronald Reagan. And it seems that the Democrats are going to nominate somebody in Bernie Sanders who honeymooned in the Soviet Union and still seems to prefer Marxism over capitalism. It's hard to see why they'd be choosing Donald Trump over Bernie Sanders. This administration has been consistent in sanctioning Russia for interference, and this administration is the one that actually in 2018 made sure there was not corruption in the midterm elections.
There is a consistent story, and I know that that's the White House argument, that there is no intelligence saying this, but there is a consistent story that came out this week, and we've heard it from members of the committee, the Intelligence Committee. We've heard it from members of the intelligence community. We've heard it from people in your own White House, and that is that Shelby Pearson, who is the intelligence community's election security czar, told Congress that the Russians are trying to help Donald Trump. The specific words she used are, developed a preference for President Trump. The president's reaction was to call in her boss, acting DNI Chief Joe Maguire, who spent 40 years, first as a Navy SEAL and then in counterintelligence, to fire him and to replace him with Ambassador Richard Grenell, a Trump partisan who has almost no intelligence experience. You saying none of this happened?
Let me correct you on several fronts, Chris. First of all, I think it's disconcerting that the briefing that you mentioned was a classified briefing in the House. That's one of the president's concerns, is that Adam Schiff's committee continues to leak selectively information.
I know, but you can't say it didn't happen and then say they leaked it.
I am saying it didn't happen, because I am saying what happened as far as the briefing, the same briefing the president get on election security, we're able to outline what we've done, measures we've worked with 1,100 municipalities to secure our election results, and the intelligence committee not giving us information that they're trying to help re-elect Donald Trump.
I just want to be clear on this. You're denying, wait a second, you're denying that Shelby Pearson, who's the election security czar, you're denying that under questioning from Democrats, she gave any indication that the Russian efforts to meddle in the election was because they have found a preference for President Trump. You're flatly denying that.
That was a classified briefing. I'm not going to comment on specifically what she said in that. I am telling you.
No, wait a minute. You did just classify and said there's no intelligence.
I'm telling you the briefing that the president received that I was a party to, and that's not information that came out of the briefing that the president got on election security, Chris.
But you're not denying. You're not denying that that was part of the briefing she gave to the committee.
Whatever briefing she gave the committee was supposed to be classified. And once again, Adam Schiff's committee is selectively leaking out information and often distorting information is our belief. They've done it many times.
But I don't understand. You're saying it's not true and they leaked it.
No, Chris. This is pretty consistent and I think pretty clear. What I'm telling you is that was a classified briefing that shouldn't have been discussed. The briefing the president received, the intelligence committee has not told us that Russia is trying to re-elect Donald Trump.
So why was Joe Maguire? Why was her boss called in?
He was part of the same briefing, Chris. It's more bad information. He was part of the same briefing. He was not.
And did the president not begin to question him because he had gotten reports? Excuse me. Is it not true that the president questioned Joe Maguire very pointedly because he had gotten reports at the House briefing, which had happened just before, that members of the Republican committee said, this is what Shelby Pearson said?
Chris, there's a lot of bad information here again. The president did question him because he's saying, why did they get a briefing before I did? But at the same time, the administration has great respect for Admiral Maguire. He's a patriot who served our administration and served our country admirably. The president is looking for another place to have him continue to serve inside the Trump administration.
If he has such respect for Joe Maguire, why was he not only, let me finish the question, why was he not only fired, but told to clear out by 9 o'clock the next morning?
Chris, it's not firing. His position is supposed to be completed by March 12th. He's not going to be renominated. He, in fact, when his position came on, was reluctant to serve in this role. So the administration's been looking for somebody consistently. Rick Grenell is going to now serve in a temporary capacity. The president's announced he's going to look to have a more permanent replacement.
Was Maguire told to clear out your office the next day?
I don't know if Maguire was told or not. I've not heard that.
I have not heard that is like one of the ways that people lie when they're in the Trump administration. And Robert O'Brien is like, I haven't seen the intelligence. I refuse to see the intelligence. We have a whole policy in place so that intelligence doesn't get to the people at the top levels and we squelch it. But I don't know what is going on. But I think I pretty much criticized that clip before I showed it, and it fits in with the analysis I've given through multiple news sources that I've shown you that Shelby Pearson, under questioning, said that there was a preference for Trump, but the intelligence may only show that Putin thinks he can work with Trump. There's also a activity underway to support Bernie Sanders in the primary, not necessarily the general election, but it's all part of the Russian scheme to sow distrust and discord in the American electorate in 2020, like they did so successfully in 2016, probably one of the most successful intelligence efforts in history, based on the bang for the buck they got. But anyway, that is the last clip I want to show you, and the last of my analysis. I do have a bonus Dash and Sandy clip I'm going to show you, but first I want to thank the Super Chat contributors who I saw along the way. Here's the screenshot I took of that. So thanks for all those contributors. I didn't really answer all those questions along the way. I saw one about the brokered convention. I'm going to have plenty of chance to talk about that along the way. This isn't the last week. Like I said, next week is going to be the last week where there are going to be 6 people. The week after that, it's going to narrow down and narrow down. There might be a brokered convention, and I'll have plenty of time to talk about that. But thanks for those Super Chat contributions. Down in the video description, you can also see ways to contribute to support. You know, a lot of my videos get demonetized these days, and because they're controversial topics for YouTube, and so I depend more and more, especially on the PayPal contributors, and especially the Patreon contributors. At the $5 level, you get, I will send you this hashtag LiberalViewer weatherproof vinyl sticker. At the $10 level, you get this sticker and this pocket constitution. Actually, for people who want to contribute $30, I have a few left of these candles that I've been smelling burning. I have like 10 or 15 of these hashtag LiberalViewer candles I send out at the $30 level, and then I'm actually going to be redoing the t-shirts. I had these Impeach Trump t-shirts at the $15 level. I'm gonna redo those as hashtag LiberalViewer t-shirts, but that's coming up later this year. But those are all ways to support me beyond the thumbs up and the supportive comments. And for the Dash and Sandy fans out there, Dandy, I guess some people like to call Dash and Sandy Dandy. I do have a clip of Dash and Sandy interacting during KCDC earlier today. This is KCDC airs in the last couple hours before I broadcast my live stream, and I know there are some conspiracy theories out there that all my Dash and Sandy, aka Dandy clips, are pre-recorded, not recorded on the day of the actual live stream. Well, you can hear KCDC in the background of this Dash and Sandy interaction. I watch it speeded up like I do a lot of the news shows. I recommend maybe if I'm talking too slow, YouTube gives you the option to speed up what my live stream, if you're watching it as a recorded show. Here's a little bit of speeded up KCDC in the background of the Dash and Sandy clip tonight over here.
And the status quo. Sure. In Congress, I see a majority of Democrats are there in the middle, not at the far end, that Senator Sanders is asking us to make a false choice.
So I take your point. However, how is it that everyone's just figuring this out now? That Bernie Sanders should, that they needed to attack Bernie Sanders, and why didn't it happen before?
Well, first of all, I never.
And that's the last clip. Thanks for joining me. I will be back next Sunday and every Sunday for the foreseeable future, giving my media criticism and political commentary and responding to some of your comments when I have a chance. And anyway, I don't know whether I will have a chance to do anything else this week, but I will be back next Sunday and every Sunday for the rest of 2020 at least. And until next Sunday, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.